throughout time. The crowds in the streets. The not knowing. What was once deemed simple turned into a stream of necessities. For pagans. For disemboweled head, hunting cannibals. A president walks into a room, makes statements, and departs for the next engagement. News chatters. In Borneo, the man who lives in the trees watches a sunset, amazed as the humans with their tales of the man who lives in the trees. The much-honored yam house. Darkening, the sky ends, and the magic of sleep appears as the puff of day expires, the fire watch goes out. Elgar's variations turned out slightly for Alexander Hall. The town was spruced up and could not be said to remind one of New Jersey. It had recently been proven that the early gods landed on the highest points of the planet, some migrating south and others going north. Clairvoyance also proved to exist in the spiritual constructions of Virginia Woolf and James Hilton. This has been well documented in conferences, seminars, etc., etc. Xavier Manfred had been in a lounge chair on the deck of a steamship passing through the Sunda Straits when a volcano erupted on a large island in the distance abeam the side of the ship whereon Manfred had placed himself. "Murder the silence," he said. A deckhand came up to him and said, "Pardon, sir. That was a ladies' orchestra you said that about in one of your books." "Yes. I suppose it was. Well, the world is a rather stupid place. Let's ease ourselves and see how the dust settles." Cinders alighted on the steamer's deck, but the great man was not concerned as he knew the vessel was far enough away from the volcano so as not to fall victim to its fury. He closed his eyes and thought about the interiors of the islands of the archipelago he so loved. His dreaming wandered off course, and he thought instead of Vesuvius and Pompeii, no doubt brought about by the similar events off the port side of the steamer. He saw the many corpses brought to their deaths in an instant as they inhaled the great heat resulting from the plastic catastrophe that buried all as the mountain hurled off its topmost layers. Corpses turned into mummies without the necessity of wrapping and embalming. His beloved natives of the archipelago were much more familiar with these upheavals as they live on the most volcanically active piece of real estate on the planet. The dream became Manfred as a photographer. Black and white images. A jade bridge. Mangrove thickets at the sea's edge. Tiger. Reefs atoll. A three-mast schooner is standing off outside the lagoon, and a crowd of gathering natives is on the beach. It did not surprise him that the natives were European in their physical presence, and on board, the schooner captain and seamen were islanders with all that implies for the differences in the races. Esteves de Campa, a man of dark complexion with an even proportioning of physical characteristics, was hailed to come above deck by the captain of the schooner. "Father, what do you make of the gathering off there on the beach?" "Islanders, ripe for the harvesting. And captain, as you conduct your business, you will certainly be most kind as to allow me mine." Captain Horan, after 3 weeks at sea, was glad to have Father de Campa as a member of his crew, as he afforded him the only opportunity of any civil exchange. He encouraged de Campa to speak further on the scene presented. "Do they seem to be virgin heathens, or can you note any sign of them having had contact with our humanizing and glorious society? Have they, you think, ever seen civilization?" "Oh no, Captain Horan. They only sling stones and shells upon their shoulders. You see no iron amongst them." Wanting to continue the conversation, Captain Horan said, "Do you think they will be hostile then, Father?" "My good captain, all these islanders hold legends in their hearts of bad people who come, some out of the stars, others from over the waves, who murder and consume their kin. But they also all have heard tales of objects to be had from these people who will add riches and prestige to their lives. Do we risk too much going ashore?" "No more than at any of the other islands." The captain took the man of the cloth's hand and bid him to kneel down with him. "Come, Father. Let us kneel here on my quarterdeck and pray for the salvation of these miserable beings and for our own salvation, as unnecessary as that may seem, for surely the favors of heaven already shine on us, as an inspection of the cargo spaces below the decks of this worthy vessel would make clear. 2 boats were lowered into the water, manned with rowers and steersmen. Captain and father, seamen with guns and powder aboard. Out from under the shadows of their ship, they entered the bright hot sunlight over the waters of the lagoon. Pearly blue water and haze, hot beyond anything holy, they pulled to the shore, their strength seemingly depleted even by this brief encounter over the otherwise idyllic waters. Watched closely by the fair-skinned islanders on the beach, none of the parties were brimming with confidence. But being men who knew the danger and were well aware of their innate superiority as regards other types of people in the world, they would certainly prevail, and shortly, some of the lovely natives ahead of them would soon be aboard the schooner, and an accounting would be made if this island would be capable of sustaining any inroads of civilization. Horan, De Campa, and 2 seamen removed themselves from the boats and made the last steps to the beach through the water, the boats standing off in case a hasty retreat was needed. They had landed on a beach that was at low tide, and being of the type built up by rocky coral and some sand, many sea creatures would become exposed and die. Their rotting remains did not necessarily wash out to sea on subsequent tides, thus, a nasty odor added to the already unpleasant sensation of heat. The group stood facing each other 200 feet apart. Horan waved his hands, trying to indicate friendship. De Campa reverentially asked his deity for protection. He also made it known that if it was pleasing, he would make these strange savages more like himself. One of the women broke from her group and ran towards the sailors, laying down a fish held in a large leaf. She had done this so quickly and unexpectedly that the visiting seaman was taken by surprise, and she was back with her people before they had a chance to react. The sailors looked at the fish. It had been cooked, and the implication was for them to accept it as a gift of food. They did, each member of the shore party taking part with their fingers and gesturing it tasted good, and they were very pleased. The charm and the magic of the South Seas became alive for them as they surveyed the scene. I love these people, Horan thought as he savored the juices of the fish. Now the islanders lit torches and started a circular dance to a slow, enthralling beat. Smoke from the torches reached the seamen, and Xavier Manfred woke from his dream. Smoke, ash, and cinders from the volcano were falling on the steamer. Fires had started where there was flammable material. Deckhands and all were scurrying about trying to douse the flames. Manfred was not worried, as he had been through similar events in his long career at sea. Yet he had mistaken the danger, and after a while, enough soot and cinder had gone down the smokestack as to snuff out the boiler. Without power, the steamer lost steerage and, as any seaman knows, to be without steerage at sea is never a good thing, more so if something nasty is happening in the vicinity. The men assigned to the boiler room went about getting the boiler and engines started again. Yet, in one of those events which give us pause to consider the timing of things and the implication of randomness in our lives, the steamer and all hands became a great deal more entwined in the natural processes taking place in their vicinity. Greatly heated liquefied earth, cataclysmic explosion of a conical mountain top, not the first nor last time this would happen at this very spot, the cracking and lifting of the seafloor, and a displacement of seawater voluminous enough to inundate scores, if not hundreds of large islands. Given the right timing, this movement of water would have passed quite harmlessly under the steamer, but as it had lost steerage, she was now close into the Borneo shore. Here the displaced water could not continue passively but, meeting the resistance of a rising coast, was forced to pile up and so build an ever-growing wall of water that hurled itself upon the land. The steamer was, of course, helpless. Manfred was overwhelmed with awe as the massive wall of water bore down on them, then lifted the steamer as if a cork and hurled it like lightning towards the coast. Not a bad way for a seaman to die, he thought. Instinctively he grasped a stanchion. Night and the steamer rushed to the coast. The perfect hues and coloration of the South Sea sky was veiled by the choking soot and ash, so that an observer, if indeed there could have been an observer during this calamitous event, would hardly have been able to see the steamer taken up by the turbulent wave and aimed as if a missile and hurled into the mouth of a river. As the coast grew close, the speed quickened. Inside the mouth, a true disaster was unfolding, as a small island city was in the way of the wall of water. If one could rush inland and to a higher elevation, a chance at saving one's life existed, but for most, that was not the case. And the things in the water, including the steamer, carried inland until something or other got in the way, stopping and splintering the thing, whatever it was. The steamer was, after a while, still afloat, but only barely, as water-filled compartments, its hull having been violated repeatedly in the furious flow. No longer able to hold on, Manfred was washed along the deck, then almost sucked down a hatchway, the hatch closing over him with his upper body half out. That partial closing of the hatch saved him from drowning in the flooded compartment below. Eventually, the water relented and gave way, rushing back to the sea, leaping and twirling like a clown gone half mad. The steamer, jammed behind an elevation, was stranded a distance which would later be determined to be 48 miles inland from the coast. Those survivors could be looked at for their conditions. Frightened and tired, they found spaces to sleep. The smoke and the ashes that fell on them minimized the feasting of mosquitoes, which would have under normal conditions made such a night of sleep impossible. In the morning, Marcos, a seaman who worked in the engine room, woke and surveyed the scene. The twisted, contorted, sleeping bodies haphazardly strewn about the decks and compartments were an eerie sight. He put his hand on one of the sleeping souls and said, "Peter. Peter. Get up." At first, Peter did not wake, but Marcus tried again, and he sleepily opened his eyes, rubbing them and moaning. "Oh, my God. What happened? Where are we?" "It's all right, Peter. She has been put up on the land, and we are safe. Get up with me, and we will wake the others." Peter was distracted by the white powder covering him, moving his fingers through it, pinching it between two, and rubbing it. It was so fine some would lift as smoke when he touched it. As he stared at this behavior for a moment, the events from the previous day reissued in his mind, and as he looked up, he briefly relived the calamity. The steamer had been carried at high speed over the land, plowing through what was in its path. Villages were inundated and in ruin, and their people were screaming. Those who had already drowned were being carried away as if just another piece of wreckage. Soon fully awake, he turned to Marcus and said, "Let's wake the others. This is a horrible place." Assembled as a group, the survivors exchanged strategies that would ensure their safety. So remarkable was it that their lives had been spared, it would be a shame should they not live on, to live as peaceful men once again, to reunite with loved ones, at least those who had such relations, for many a sailor has but his mates for his lifelong companions. After much debate, to which Manfred had a good deal to contribute, they decided to make a march to the coast. Over the sides of the steamer, they descended, plunging into the jungle. There were 16 survivors. It would be determined later that most deaths on the steamer had been caused by suffocation, the volcanic air stuffing the lungs with fine particles preventing the exchange of oxygen, painful breathing occurring, then in a final gasp extinguishing the life. The jungle had a strange look to it that morning. Salt from the sea had set to desiccating the vegetation, which was now curling and turning yellowish. Being sailors, the art of navigation was well known among them, and as they had secured some instruments off the ship, they set a course across the land, which they felt should soon enough bring them to the coast and eventual rescue. As the captain had survived, he was in command of the band of men setting out into the altered setting of the storm-changed landscape. He had Manfred at his side. "What do you imagine, Mr. Manfred, will be the extent of our march?" The color of the sky would put the coast at 50 miles. Well then, we could be there in 2 or 3 days. One may not know what is between, which may hamper our progress. Quite right, Mr. Manfred. I know little of this land. Do you, sir? What I do know does not bring us to the most favorable of resolutions. And how is that? We had been sailing off a part of the coast that has very low-lying land at its back. Oh, I see. And you mean to imply the sea may have taken us a considerable distance inland with its surge? Quite so. Changing the direction of the conversation, the captain asked. And what was it, Mr. Manfred? Did you always want to write stories? No, Captain. I had always wanted to go to sea.